rather go.
I got mine first.
Yes. Why?
You all have papers ready to slideshows?
Yeah, we got all of them. I've overviewed that.
Do you want to test?
Yes.
Let's make sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
And
Just in case.
Wisconsin, my first 3 years,
Should I just, you tell me what they.
I don't know,
Try.
but he knows.
Excellent. As long as some of us or one of us does, we should be fine.
we met over the video class.
Yes.
That's changing.
I just want to make sure. Yeah. Love it.
Day 1. Day 1, 11, but who's the, yes. So who's the moderator? And then your last name? Florida, so that should be, because it's under your name. So mine is the first one.
It's a pleasure to be fine.
No, no, I have to.
Yeah, so you can.
You tell us however you want to.
10 to 15 minutes so we can do
Yeah,
some further
yeah,
discussion.
exactly.
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
Thank you.
Good, good.
All right. Whatever you let.
Open up yours.
You go ahead.
You're the first one.
And I prefer.
So you're kept on these.
So whoever's presenting,
Maybe we just, yeah, and then
We can reassemble up front for the discussion. We'll aim for 10 minutes. I'll give you more or less an indication if you need a few more minutes, no problem.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Even then. Yes. All right, so who's the first presenter? Who would like to go first?
me,
All right, let me introduce you all. Welcome to our panel on collaborating with colleagues in extreme operating environments. My name is Leonardo Flores. I'll be moderating this discussion. We have a great panel here with a number of professors. You're not? All right, and your name is? Aleida. See, we're going off script here. I would like to begin with Aleida Villavencio. She is from Innovation Ecosystems Development Program Leader at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So let's begin with Aleida.
Thank you. This is my very first time representing Harvard University, so I'm very nervous.
Seems like an easy crowd, right?
Yes, much better than the first one in terms of size and, no pressure. Alright, so I was invited as a coincidence last year to the Puerto Rico event and the rice reunion that was there. It was a series of people who could not make it, but they were like desperately trying to get someone to represent Harvard. And I was available, so I was the lucky one. I was like, Puerto Rico, yes, of course I'm there. So for this year, what I tried to do, because I did not necessarily have the opportunity to work with colleagues in post-disaster situations, what I did is I asked a couple of the scientists, doctors, researchers in my department, which is the Environmental Health Department at Harvard University, how have they done it in the past and what are some of the lessons learned? So what has been our experience in collaborating with colleagues that are disaster survivors? I think the first thing they told me is prevention is key. And I think that is kind of obvious for everyone. Try to develop climate change preparedness plans beforehand and try to create those academic partnerships that will allow for prevention and the analysis of possible disaster scenarios. The goal should be, of course, to prevent chaos, save lives, and improve response times. However, if once you're there, I think part of what I've learned throughout the Puerto Rico RISE experience is that you have to make sure that interventions are based on IRB-approved protocols. That socioeconomic context of the place that you're visiting to do the research, it's really relevant to the research that you have to perform and the way in which you have to perform such research. The benefit for the community should come before other liberals all the time. And this is something that really hit me when I heard it. Dr. Miguel Cedeño, he worked in Houston, I believe, after a disaster situation. And he said, in a place where there is destruction and suffering, the priority can never be the deliverables of any research, but the benefit the researchers can provide to the affected community. And I don't know if we always have this in mind when we try to visit these communities. We just think maybe of our interest in terms of research, what I want to get out of it, what I want my students to get out of it, what are we bringing to the community that is actually suffering from disaster situations. Some of the programs we have at the university is obviously continuous research agreements with other universities, government and academia collaborations that happen very, very frequently, and education programs in developing countries and vulnerable communities. There's a whole initiative at Harvard University related to disaster preparedness and planning for humanitarian crisis, and it is called the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. What are the negatives and positives about the ways in which we establish these relationships? Well, part of the downside, I think everyone agreed, was that decentralization within universities, especially at Harvard being such a huge institution, causes researchers to not necessarily use the already existing resources and collaboration agreements. So everyone just tries to do their own thing without necessarily going through the channels that are already there and available. So this causes problems to the host researchers that need to cater for the needs of international visitors while actually dealing with a humanitarian crisis. Harvard resources, unfortunately, are not necessarily well known outside the university, so people outside cannot benefit from lessons learned and best practices for preparedness in humanitarian crises that are publicly available. The lack of awareness of the social economic context, and I think we probably stressed this point throughout the entire presentation. At least everyone at the department mentioned it at least once, which means this is something I guess they face a lot of times. Some of the positives, though, in terms of how we relate with other colleagues, is the way in which relationships are established, take a proactive approach. They prepare communities for different types of disasters and humanitarian crises, and have central library, which is, again, this is something that not a lot of people outside of Havre know. There are central libraries with lessons learned that could be deployed during health crisis. The development of academic bridges that translate into educational opportunities is definitely a positive. And students can apply protocols and learn new tools to develop research in post-disaster scenarios that otherwise would only be learned in a classroom. What changes should we promote in order to develop a more just and fair relationship? I think part of the opportunities are research protocols must be capped by an ethics committee that determines that it has a primary component of benefit for the community. Goals should be to attend trauma first and foremost, remedy it, and prevent it from happening again. The opportunity would be to have a plan in advance. Of course, as Cecilia mentioned this morning, it would be great if we could have a plan in place to deal with this humanitarian crisis. Establish predetermined activities for different scenarios and have contacts with local research and authorities. I think this is key. One of the things that I learned from talking to the people in Puerto Rico last year was how people was just jumping in without necessarily knowing the community, without knowing the community leader, without knowing who to contact, who to guide them, and then it becomes a problem for the host. More than you're helping, you're adding to the struggle, right? So it is detrimental in the end to just jump in uninvited and uninformed. An important recommendation is for the local authorities and research institutions to have predetermined messages to control the flow of researchers to disaster areas. This may sound rude sometimes, but it's necessary to tell people there are places where you cannot go unless you are accompanied by a local leader, a local researcher, a local institution, someone who invited you to be there, so they know that you're going to help them in some way and not just going to be there on your own. And always take into consideration the local socioeconomic context, and whenever possible, have a local contact within your team. These happened to me last year, and this I want to close my intervention with. It is easy to ask people in recurrently disaster areas, why don't you move elsewhere? I asked that question. Like, why don't they move elsewhere? The answer is very simple. I learned that after sitting there for 3 days talking to people who experienced disaster, is the support network that they built in their community is what makes them resilient. Moving somewhere else may change their individual luck, but who will care for the community when they break apart? Thank you very much. Are there any questions, or will we wait for me?
Just wait for the end. Have a conversation. Next, Elvia Melendez Ackerman, professor at University of Puerto Rico, EOEs. Yes, Katie. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I thank Aleida. I mean, she summarized so many things that were so true, well, the answers to those questions. I chose to perhaps give my answers or my take to those questions by showing you some examples of how people dealt, examples that I knew about. So I'm going to start with the ACRA lab. This is the Atmospheric Chemistry and Aerosols Research Lab. This is led by Dr. Olga Mayol. Her lab basically characterizes the physical and chemical properties of aerosols transported over long distances. She and her lab team manage different air monitoring stations. Sahara dust is a theme. How does that affect public health? How does it affect air quality, how does it affect even weather formation. So her stations are actually, or at least two of them, Pico del Este is one of them. It's a station that is located in the rainforest, in the El Yunque National Forest, one of the highest places in Puerto Rico. It's a station that was important because it's where clouds form through orographic formation. Then she had a station, a coastal station in Fajardo, Cabezas de San Juan. That was our reference station for clean air, and then an urban station back in campus. Well, her field stations look like this, you know, after the hurricane. It was like a bomb. Concrete. She lost what I calculated, about a quarter, just in equipment, not just trailers, just in equipment, about $250,000 of equipment. So she lost her ability to collect data overnight. Her office was actually in the building that suffered the most on campus. So she lost her, her data, at least the paper data that she had, not the digital data. Her lab was flooded, so the urban station was inoperable. And as I wanted to say something about her stations. They met the standards and were part of two very important networks around the world: the Global Atmospheric Watch, which is supported by the World Meteorological Organization, and then AreaNets, NOAA's AreaNets. These stations monitor Earth atmospheric patterns around the world, and they need to meet the standards. So she lost her capacity to collect data overnight. So how you get up from that? And I actually interviewed her. I kind of knew, but I knew more as I talked to her. She actually she's part of big networks, and she's been collaborating with colleagues, at least through the stations, since the early 2000s. And she had a couple of colleagues in particular, once the hurricane hit, started sending emails to their shared networks, their own networks, talking about the situation in Puerto Rico. And then finally, when Olga was able to make contact with them, she was able to give them a rundown. I lost everything. And they resend emails again, and then broker by these colleagues, help started coming in. Equipment donations, tips to where to write proposals and how to get things. NOAA was very instrumental at repairing things, sending spare parts. She got loans from University of Paris, the Marx Planck Institute. Help came from anywhere, not just the United States, from just everywhere. She was able to write in 3 months, November 2017 to February 2018. 7 proposals. She got 6 of those. 3 to NSF, 2 to NASA. She needed to respond. She had nothing else to do. She needed to respond. And that outside help was very important. Carnegie Mellon, she wanted to measure air quality right after the hurricane. Everybody was using power plants, so the air quality just deteriorated. Carnegie Mellon donated portable air equipment. So where is she now? Her station at Cabezas de San Juan in Fajardo is 90% up. The station at Pico del Este, which is very important, well thought after, is still not connected to the electricity. Equipment is piling up, things are piling up, but still 2 years later, she's standing in there like a BCB. This is a list of equipment that she was able to recover. Remember, she lost everything. I'll tell you about the second case. This is the El Verde Field Station. That's the site of the LTER, the Luquillo LTER. This is an international network of long-term ecological research and is NSF funded. The Luquillo LTR has been operating in Puerto Rico since 1988, and after Hurricane Hugo, it became the premier site to study the effects of hurricanes on biodiversity and ecosystem functions. They published over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers, among other things. This is a very, very successful NSF site. Of course, buildings they lost the roof, like everybody else, they lost the roof. And again, how do you recover from that? Electricity is an issue over there, communications were down. How did they come back? Well, as it turns out, and I didn't know this until I talked to the PI, Jess Zimmerman, there were a group of interns that weathered the hurricane at a satellite facility of the station. So they were very instrumental at joining the community and helping clear out the way to get to the station. Then a colleague from the LTR network came and supplied a satellite phone. That's for the station. That's how communication with the outside world started. Then colleagues from the LTR network started a GoFundMe account with very specific needs. They needed electricity to run the station, and they were able in a short period of time to raise over $10,000. And it was needed. It was needed. I'll tell you in the case of Jess, I'll say that the LTR network wrote in a very short period of time, like 5 proposals, they got 4, and these were to NSF. This last example is dear to my heart because it's about a student of mine, a PhD student, Sofia Olivero. We're part of the San Juan Ultra Research Network, which started out as an NSF-funded project. Ultra stands for Urban Long-Term Research Areas. And she was measuring ecosystem services in yards. She's interested in sustainability and the relationship between ecosystem services and well-being. Well, in the middle of her data campaign, the hurricane came in. She was freaking out. I said, Sophia, this became a project about measuring the ecosystem service loss. And you know, we're gonna do it. She put together in a very short period of time an experiment.com. We pitched it out to our network, and she was able to meet her deadline. Why was this important for Sophia? TAs and most graduate students on September 20, their TA contracts have not been finalized, and they were left out of the system in terms of receiving payments. They didn't receive payments until the following semester. They were very vulnerable. This particular project, she was able to fund herself and undergraduate assistants, which were all also without funds. Our networks were very diligent at helping her out, and actually through that work, I was able to submit a proposal later on through DOI and the Forest Service to measure ecosystem service losses in different cities in San Juan, which funded 12 students, graduate and undergraduate. Almost all of that all of that money went to fund students. What do I think were the similarities in these cases? These are the cases that work. They were collaborative networks already in place, long-standing, that had off-island components, off-island elements. But these networks have been in place for a while. The outside members of these networks were very proactive. They acted fast. It was always with a spirit of, what do you need? How can I help? And going into what Aleida said, help before the deliverables. That was that was key. We had the right proposals, we still had to function, and that happened in little hubs. This is the example of the molecular science laboratory, which a professor that was directing it at a time, he turned the downside lobby into a place that had electricity and internet. Students from all over the island, public and private universities, would come here. It would run 24/7. Unfortunately, not everybody knew about it, but it was there. For the Alberta Field Station, they've been running in power generation since 2017, and that was sort of like their hub. That's how they got the electricity. They had the satellite phone. For Sofia, the facilities at the Puerto Rico Science Trust also work, but they were these pockets. We went to these pockets. The networks that were long-standing also have federal researchers or professionals from federal agencies that were already collaborating in there, and they facilitated help and visibility to funding opportunities. But the most important thing is that these interactions were organic. Nobody came in a helicopter and they were organic. They functioned because they were already there. They came from a place of trust, and there was somebody that people trusted that was able to broker help and make things happen. My last slide is like again what Aleida said, knowing the context. For the University of Puerto Rico community, the students, the staff, professors, we were not only dealing with Hurricane Maria and the aftermath, our personal and our professional, the physical destruction of things. We had actually come out of an extended semester, 7-month semester, that was prompted by student and university community demonstrations and stoppages to be able to get accessible education, affordable education. So Maria meant another 7 long semester. This at the same time is coming on top of the economic crisis in Puerto Rico, and in 2017, right before the hurricane, we get this announcement that, big chunk, 40% of the funds for the University of Puerto Rico were gonna be cut, just like that. So what I'm trying to say is that people were really vulnerable. People were really vulnerable. The system was weak. The institutional, what makes the institutional structure of the University of Puerto Rico system was weak. It was not willing, not able to help itself, except for these pockets. And it was not able to receive help. It was that disorganized. So that's what I had to say, and as I said, very much in line with what Aleida said.
Next up, Shalene Miller, visiting lecturer at University of North Carolina.
All right, I don't have any slides. This is more narrative. So 2017 really changed my research focus. I'd always considered myself a planner of green infrastructure, healthy communities. Probably should not have been surprised, because I now look back and see all the major things in my life were set by disasters. From running during Hurricane Rita, after Katrina had come through, being part of the mass evacuation from Houston, and being with a close family member who died that weekend. To being due with my daughter right in the middle of Hurricane Ike, and she held off just long enough to get electricity back where she was going to be born. So 2017 with Harvey, where I had family, Irma, where I was living in Florida, and then Maria. And I was part of, kind of like everyone else says, there was these communications going out. And it was a very random communication on people for trees, essentially. And somebody from the Arboretums on Inez was asking desperately for help. They had just spent all their money recovering from Irma. They couldn't find things to bring up trees. They couldn't find chainsaws to fix parts. Nothing was available. And they were desperately asking for help. And I couldn't help. I couldn't give garden expertise. But I said, well, I can find out what are the challenges they're meeting and what can we do in the future. So I went down there and I actually went through several green spaces and seeing how we don't talk about them, right? And this was my thing, and yet everyone was out in them, right? There was this need to return to normalcy. I came in January to Puerto Rico, and everything was officially shut down. There was no electricity still outside of San Juan. I drove through the down power lines as I drove around, but the people were out. I have pictures of people cycling, and here's the big tree in the middle, and just cycling around it with little children. So they needed to return to normal. So I tried to get a little bit more detail and make some more local connections, and that's what brought me to RISE. I had contacted Cecilio after reading something about it and said, hey, do you know anyone? And he said, well, why don't you come down here? And I actually spent the first day saying, oh, am I in the right place? I am not an energy person. And it was, all the talk was about energy. I said, oh no, why am I here? And but as we sat down through the day at our collaborations, and the great thing about RISE, and I think that's what has really brought me to talk about collaboration now, is hierarchy was gone. We talked to each other as individuals. It was those with this knowledge and those with that knowledge. It didn't matter if you were a student, a full professor, a vice president, we were all talking to each other. And then we brought in these community members. And we were having these ideas sitting at tables talking about whatever field we were talking about. And we were able to say, well, what do you think about that? Oh, go grab him over there. He's a leader. Let's see what he thinks this would work. And it wasn't easy all the time. I remember having conversations where me and a couple others, there were very few of us who were from planning, and sitting down and saying, well, if you're going to talk about putting in solar, it should be part of this bringing the community together, bring it back to squares, think about how transportation is affecting all of this. And some people were saying, this is a solar thing, why are you talking about, transportation? And it was a hard conversation, but we were able to talk about this such that I actually had people coming up to me after, can you tell me some books? This is the first time I've heard this. Maybe we need to think about this. And so I started thinking the more I think about things, the more I get into metaphors. I was thinking of it